The first sign was the shifting shadows. Sarah noticed them on her walk home, the way they stretched and contorted, defying the setting sun. Sleep became a distant memory, plagued by unsettling dreams. Her once peaceful neighborhood felt different, cloaked in an unsettling silence. Even the air tasted different, thick with a metallic tang. The oak tree outside her window, a steadfast presence throughout her childhood, seemed to twist in on itself. Its bark contorted into grotesque faces, their hollow eyes watching her every move. The familiar scent of freshly cut grass was replaced by the pungent odor of decay. Her reflection in the window no longer met her gaze. Instead, a hollow-eyed specter stared back. Days bled into nights, each one colder, more unsettling than the last. The once vibrant colors of her neighborhood faded to a sickly gray. Flowers wilted, their petals turning to ash at her touch. The chirping of birds was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. The park where children once laughed and played stood deserted, the swings swaying rhythmically despite the lack of wind. The laughter lines etched into Mrs. Peterson's face, always so full of warmth, now appeared as deep, unsettling crevices. Sarah's reflection in the shop window no longer mirrored her own. It was changing, distorting, becoming something else. The wind carried whispers now, voices just out of reach. They spoke her name, their tone laced with a mocking amusement. Fear, cold and sharp, became a constant companion. It coiled in her stomach, tightened its grip around her lungs, stealing her breath. The houses on her street, once charming and familiar, now loomed over her, their windows like vacant eyes. The paint peeled and flaked, revealing rotting wood beneath. The mailboxes were all empty, except for hers. A single unmarked envelope lay inside. She couldn't avoid Mrs. Peterson forever. The old woman sat on her porch swing, her back to Sarah. "Hello?" Sarah's voice trembled, barely a whisper. Mrs. Peterson turned. Her face, once a roadmap of laughter lines, was stretched taut, a grotesque parody of youth. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, were now vacant black pits. Mrs. Peterson's lips stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. A low growl rumbled in her throat, a sound that spoke of hunger, of something primal and terrifying. Sarah stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't Mrs. Peterson. It couldn't be. The fear that had been a knot in Sarah's stomach was now a living thing, twisting and writhing within her. It whispered doubts in her ear, painting horrifying scenarios in her mind. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid, terrifying visions that left her gasping for air. The once familiar scent of her home was replaced by the metallic tang of blood and decay. The photos on her walls twisted and contorted, the smiling faces replaced with grotesque parodies. She was trapped in a nightmare, a waking horror that showed no sign of ending. The world outside her window continued its grotesque transformation. Buildings twisted and contorted, their shapes defying the laws of physics. The sky churned, a swirling vortex of unnatural colors. Sarah watched in horror as familiar landmarks melted and reformed into monstrous shapes. The air crackled with an unseen energy, sending shivers down her spine. She was no longer safe, not even within the supposed sanctuary of her own home. The walls seemed to breathe, their surfaces shifting and undulating like living flesh. "This isn't real," she whispered, her voice hoarse, cracking with terror. "This can't be real." But the evidence was all around her, the grotesque figures that stumbled through the streets, their bodies twisted and broken, the vacant eyes that stared through her, devoid of recognition, of humanity. She tried to reach out, to tell someone, anyone, what was happening, but her words were met with blank stares, with dismissive shrugs. Nobody else seemed to notice the horror unfolding around them. Isolation settled upon her like a shroud. She was alone in a world that was unraveling at the seams, a world where reality was as fluid as water. The laughter of children, once a source of joy, now sent chills down her spine. Every face she saw was a mask, hiding something monstrous beneath. Every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen life. The world she once knew, the world of order and reason, was gone. The unraveling was relentless, consuming everything in its path. Streets buckled and cracked, swallowing cars and people whole. Buildings groaned and swayed, their foundations crumbling into dust. The sky rained down ash and fire, a symphony of chaos and destruction. And through it all, Sarah watched, her heart pounding against her ribs, her mind teetering on the brink of madness. The world was ending, and she was the only one who seemed to know it. Then, from the heart of the chaos, a sound, a low rhythmic chanting, growing louder with each passing moment. It was a sound that promised power, but also hinted at a darkness so profound it chilled her to the bone. The chanting seemed to seep into her very being, worming its way into her thoughts, her dreams. And as the chanting reached a fever pitch, Sarah knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the unraveling was only just beginning.